Yeah, I'm Mike Hall. I've been composing music for record and film for almost 30 years now. So most of my work is music for film, but I still produce records and do voiceover every now and then and just do a little bit of everything.
Well, I think we talked before, so you know some of the questions I'm going to ask because, it's the button of the heads, because creatively you have to see a movie a certain way, and then the filmmaker sometimes sees it a different way. I told you from my experience, do you have that or,
I kind of got into, I just wanted to a metal singer doing touring and stuff and then making records. And I kind of fell into doing filmmaking or film composing, but it kind of seemed easy for me. I could picture and start hearing sounds and themes just from a few minutes talking with the director. Sometimes they'll say, "Well, hey, I can send you the copy of the script and everything," and that's fine. But really, I'm pretty quick to come up with musical themes and ideas just from speaking with the director.
well, what I was saying is, do you ever get to where you guys see it two different ways, or you haven't had that?
Originally, I thought, okay, well, I'll put what I think, and I've learned make it easy on myself, ask as many questions, ask for links, make sure that we're on the same page as soon as possible in the film. I'll throw a ton of ideas at them. They can place them where they want as they're going through the editing process.
I've done that. I worked off of other people's like stock music, and they're like, "Hey, Jimmy, here, I don't have time, but here, pick from my stock," and I'm able to actually use it really good to where they come back and it's like that was almost like I composed to it, because I'm putting it to how I see it.
And these days, the budgets are smaller, and I totally get that. It's almost best to ask a composer if they have like their own production library. I'll send a bunch of different themed tracks that have the same theme so that at least their project has the same flow. Sometimes if you go through a commercial library, they'll have great tracks, but they won't have that theme flow to
Right.
it. Like it won't blend very well. I'm always to the idea that a score or music should never distract from the visuals. It's only there to complement.
Yeah.
Probably I'm more, I'm thinking, less is more, unless it's like actual songs, that kind of that people are familiar with. If you want it to flow, you don't want it to have different productions, or it kind of jars the audience a little bit, and you don't want them to notice the music. You don't want to distract ever from the visual or especially the dialogue.
I think I told you that's what I had on the last one, which me and this guy's worked for years together. So he's done a lot of my movies. But I kept telling him, okay, the theme that you're going for doesn't fit what I'm doing. Just like you said, if it's going to take away from the scene, it's going to hurt the movie. It has to seem like it's not even there and blend. Like I said, I understand that his music is just like my creation of my movie. He wants it to be seen, but not at the cost of the movie. You
Well,
know,
one thing that I always I try to mentor, newer composers and stuff, and I'll say, if you want your music to be heard, make an album. You can't have an ego with that. It is a um, collaboration of hundreds of different artists. To think that your music should be priority or this major thing in the film, it's there to
compliment,
just to
compliment.
complement the visual and
Yeah.
the story. I'm always somebody I'm one of those artists that's like, rules? We have no rules in art. But on
I
the other
agree.
hand, there's things that, like it or not, you really have to support the director and be as fluid working with them as possible. And that's how you get the repeat work. And so many composers where their scores have to be epic, it's just distracting, it seems like.
Yeah, it just has to move the scene from here to there without being distracting. And to guide it. I agree with you 110%. But every movie is a different situation. And I was already knew that he was good, right? So I made this short, but there was a few problems with it that the boom was underneath the camera bag and we didn't know. So there's just a little part of this short that was bad sound. And when I gave it to him to score it, the part I needed him to cover up, he dropped the music down. So I called him up, and this is the only time that Jimmy's way didn't go. But he basically he actually told me it was pretty cool because he actually put me in my place and he was like, Jimmy, your job is the movie, mine is the music, and I'm being honest, I don't see music there. And if you need to fix the sound, then that's on you. And his music was perfect for the movie. So he had a leg to stand on, you know. So I was like, whoa, so that's the first time I actually separated the two and said, okay, it's my movie, but that's his job.
Right.
Usually doesn't matter if people do the music and all that. It all comes to me, and then it becomes this big pile that I have to go
Sure.
through. But that was the first time I was like, his music's good. It fits perfect. Okay, so I can't put the problem on him. But in all circumstances, like you said, yeah, it always just has to blend. It shouldn't be standing out. It's not like you're a big singer in the movie, you know.
Right.
If everything works. I mean, how often, except for little things like, the Rocky theme or the Jaws theme, most movies you don't remember the theme because the movie's so good it's all one product. So
And I'm even thinking that some of the most impactful moments in film is when there's silence. Like I was talking to a director the other day, and they were actually doing a comedy, which most of my work is dark themes. Comedy is a lot like horror and suspense. When it gets to that, there's an impact, that funny or embarrassing moment where you're just focused on that uncomfortable situation that human being is going through. And so sometimes the most impact you can have is silence and maybe a heartbeat or a sound of a breath or that ringing in your ear or whatever.
there's
Silence is the best thing you can use.
true. And it's sometimes the safest because
Mhm.
what they don't understand is, yeah, if you're doing a comedy, the music can make it funny or it can make it silly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what if you're going for like a more straight comedy and then you're going to be more dorky and silly just in that music, it's going to take you out of the movie because it don't actually fit. Even though it's still funny, you're changing the theme of it.
Right.
At least if you tone it down and take the music out, you let the audience focus on whatever happened. That's funny.
So
And
I love that film that you did, because the funny was uh it was so true. The seriousness. Um what was that one that you showed me? Did you show me a comedy that you did?
I do a lot of movies.
Okay.
um, I send a lot of them out. There's Real Cupid is a comedy. I don't really know. You might be thinking about somebody else. I usually send just a list of my movies, and because you never know what people are into. So I'm like, hey, look at the covers and pick what you want. You want the horror, you want the thriller, you want the drama, you want the comedy.
The most difficult thing for me was, okay, well, when you say comedy, I mean, I love comedy, but what direction are you wanting to go with it? What I think's funny is more like the straight person is put in,
Odd situation.
the audience can completely relate to that horrible, situation.
It's not just for comedy. I've seen some movies that were indie movies and some big budget movies to where I'm like really into it and that music just like took me completely out. I don't know what they were thinking, but it didn't fit the scene. Even in like action films, they'd be running, but the music is like, what is that? And anything that takes your attention and makes you say, what is that? Then you're not watching anymore. Yeah.
Sometimes it can be monotonous, where it's just, okay, well, that's getting annoying, so now I'm bored with it, or I'm
Right.
not paying attention to the story. I think less is more a lot of times. I can always spot like newer filmmakers because they feel like they have to have music in every single scene. The
I
whole
used
thing
to
has to
be,
be
yeah, I
filmed.
used to be like that. Wall to wall music, that way to flow.
Right. And then eventually you just get to where it's like, nah, I don't think it needs that there. Maybe a short transition. But otherwise, I think it's good.
A little secret, a lot of those independent filmmakers, they're doing it to cover up the bad audio.
That's
So,
that's a completely different world there too. I
yeah.
just did wasn't actually doing the music. It was a sci-fi film, and they originally hired me to do, sound design, which, that was a nice different thing. And then I got roped into doing all the editing. Oh, could you take out that creaking footsteps? And it seemed like for that project, all I did was copy ambient sound, paste it into where the footstep creaking is, or noises, or
I've done that on a couple, but I'll be honest, because you have those mics that are trying to hear, so they raise it up, and it's like, well, this ain't no good because it's like trying to hear something, and it's like, well, that ain't gonna work.
like I said, that's a whole different world where you don't realize how much is involved with on location recording. I did a film. They had old hardwood floors, and every time the actor walked, it creaked the floor, and lots of echo. And
Well, they could, you know, voice over that whole thing, but I wouldn't recommend it. I did an Alien movie that took me a year and a half. It was a feature to put all the actors in because I had 5 dogs in the house. So even when the actors were coming, they were filming, they're like, people are talking in the other room. And don't I said, it don't matter. You guys are all voiceover in this whole thing. I didn't know it was going to take me a year and a half to line up everybody's voices, you
well,
know.
I've heard that generally most of it's re-recorded anyway.
Yeah.
I heard that that's pretty normal.
It's hard unless I don't know if they got new AI doing it, but to make sure that it all lines up and stuff like that. Because
Yeah.
what I also found out that I didn't know, it basically started, I wanted to do it anyway as a try. I shouldn't have did it with a feature because I would walk in my parents' house and they'd be watching old John Wayne movies. And it sounds like they're talking right behind the TV. So I was like, well, I want my movie to be like that, to have that, right there. But the one thing that I didn't count on is they can't really act. They're so worried about saying the words that they're not putting any emotion in it. So then when you're watching the movie, yeah, everything looks good. It's all lined up. It's not like a foreign film, but you could tell it's not their
Yeah. Yeah.
expression, not their. I do have highly respect for composers because in my mind, I mean, I don't know how other people look at it, but as a filmmaker, I see the composer like right under me because you guys are the ones that can make or break a film. You can make a boring scene good, but you also have that power of one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch.
Right.
You're on a tightrope when you're kind of doing it.
As I try to get as much information, like what are your influences? What films, were you influenced in this style? What kind of music are you thinking? And a lot of times, there's some times where, the director, I'm not really sure. And so then I'll say, okay, well, here's what my thoughts on it. And then I would send various samples in the beginning, and they're like, yeah, yeah, I think that would be, what I'm thinking, or sometimes they'll say, well, I want something metallic sounding, maybe something more organic. And so then I have to think, okay, what is he thinking there? Basically, I just try to send as many samples as I possibly can. And then once we get on that cut down on the back and forth, I just throw as many tracks at them into a file. Okay, I think I could use track 8 here, track 22 right there. And what are you thinking? I'm thinking, I don't even remember what track 22 meant, but as long as you think it works, I'm I'm with you. So I've got a production library of over 3,000 tracks. And so on the smaller budgets, I'll go through and, it's easy for me to pick out like, okay, we'll start off with here's the first 25 tracks. What do you like out of them? Pick and choose whatever you want. That's a lot better than actually starting from a blank screen and actually creating, but sometimes, if the budget's there, they say, no, we want an exclusive score. That's when you really have to get all the details because you don't want to spend a week working on something and then, yeah, that's not really what we had in mind.
Well, like I said, I like your attitude of that it should enhance, not hurt, because that's what I tell them. But was there a point, like you said, you've been for 30 years, was there a point to where you actually, gave the music and said you scored it perfectly and people moved it?
Actually, it kind of works in the reverse of what I think it is. So when I'm creating something, I'm going to be like, yes, they're going to love this. And then it usually ends up, no, that's not really what we had in mind. Yeah, they're going to hate this. You know what? This was perfect. This is exactly what we were looking for. All right. I always try to think, yeah, they're going to hate this
That's
because
usually the
usually
better stuff. Yeah, that's usually the better stuff. But I didn't know if you actually like, do you watch the movies that you score?
most of the films that I do are like overseas, and um, I'd say the majority of them, I never actually see them.
You don't
You know,
consider you part of the group of the
I do, but it's kind of like the story is the number one thing. I think the industry realized that you could have the biggest budget, all the CGI in the world, but if the story isn't there, it doesn't work. Same thing with the music. You could have this giant, huge score by this, the biggest whoever. If the story's not there, the film's not gonna really do that well. Yeah, a lot of times I never get to see the actual film. In fact, the first film that I did, I think it was probably 89, 90, 1990. I didn't actually get to see it until I actually saw the film in a Best Buy probably 20 years later, 15 years later.
I think people tend to try to overdo the stuff too. I it was like months ago that I actually caught The Terminator on TV and I'm sitting there, but I was listening to it rather than watch it. And I was like, there's really only one theme song in this whole movie. I didn't remember that from the past, but it's just like he goes back. That's why people remember the Jaws and the Rocky. Really, there's not a lot of variety in the thing. It's just one
Right.
theme to where now when we do the music, it's like, okay, hey, I need this one that makes somebody cry. I need this one that makes somebody laugh. And
Yeah.
enhance the one that's the most important, and then just drop the music and let the the action kind of pull them in.
Yeah.
So
When talking to the director, I'll say, okay, well, as far as the music, how do you want it? Do you want the emotion to come from, do you want the audience to see the emotion from the characters or the environment, or how do you want the audience to feel? They say, well, what do you mean? Well, like take Star Wars. That was a score where you could close your eyes and you know exactly who's in the scene because each character had their own little score theme. So many different ways to look at it.
I look at it as there's so many ways to screw it up too. You know,
That too. That too.
I mean, I look at things differently. And
You as a director, just like any other artist, you're thinking, okay, how does this relate to my audience, or I want to make sure that the audience likes it. But at the same time, eventually you get to the point where it's like, I feel this has impact on me. And, you're not always going to have that impact with all the audience. At the end of the day, you're creating something that really has to speak with you. And, okay, well, this is why I did it. It's not for the audience. It's really, I have to love it.
although I am different to where I don't really see, actually, even when I write it, when I film it, I don't have a vision for the movie until it's actually done. So that's why when people send me music, I really don't have a vision for it. It's like, what caught my ear? We don't know when we're asking you guys to do it. Any filmmaker tells you, well, I have a vision for this. He doesn't really know. He wants you to actually know what he doesn't know.
Well, again, that's why I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm going to start just throwing tons of tracks at you.
So,
Uh,
do you use a lot of real instruments or are you more a computer?
these days, most of it are sample patches, only because most people don't have the budget for a 60-piece orchestra.
Yeah.
But there's lots of ways that you can make sample tracks more real.
Well, I appreciate your time.
No, it's I'm glad we finally got to get to talk. It was great.
And I want people to come off looking good because if you look good, you're going to share it. And then if you share
Uh,
it,
take a lot to make me look good.
I'm pretty good at what I do, buddy.
Okay.